And she's like, I don't think it's warranted. And she was almost shouting. And I was like, yeah, but my condition is not that. And she said, I think you're very disagreeable to question me.
Yee, how did you find carnivore?
Really, really gradually. So it was a very long journey, but when I was in that journey, it sort of corrected a lot of what I was taught and what I believe to be true. Because I was a pharmacist in Australia, and I also practice in Singapore. But back when we were in pharmacy school, we were taught the usual things, like do low fat and I even worked in diabetes pharmacy where in Australia they give you strips for free or at a very very low cost, and so they have some information. And I actually took some of the information on board because if it's from the Diabetes Association, you can't go wrong, right? So
It must be true, right?
yeah, I even have a little booklet that they were trying to teach people who are newly diagnosed with diabetes, um, how to switch foods to lower your glycemic index. But that was kind of wrong because but at that time I didn't think it was, because they say you can have one toast with some jam on it once a day and then eat unrefined grain foods, or like a whole meal or whole wheat, whole grain, that sort of thing.
Fantastic for
I,
keeping your blood sugar
yeah.
under control.
Well, I was diagnosed with polycystic ovarian syndrome, PCOS, and at when I was about 26, but I probably had that 10 years before, because my period stops being regular to the point that I don't remember when was the last time I had a period. But when I was 19, I thought it wasn't really right. So back then I was living in Malaysia with my parents. So we went to our usual local doctor. And we told her like the period starts to be irregular and very irregular, like maybe 3, 4 times a year. And she's like, "Oh, you're fine." And she was like, she said everything's fine. And she even quoted an example of her sister or relative who had periods 3, 4 times a year and managed to conceive. And that what was like, okay, if the doctor was reassuring that there's nothing wrong with, and we don't seek any more, you know, investigation. I was 19 then, and then I moved to Australia and I did my pharmacy school. There really wasn't much taught about PCOS. There was something taught about diabetes with all that medication, the spiel of how you can treat this and what this medication do, but there is not a lot of like dietary advice or taught in school. There was one lecture for nutrition, and I well, she did a good job in teaching us. Well, I remember two takeaways. One is whatever is low in fat is high in sugar. And the other thing is it's better to not eat something than eat it and then go exercise later. And those are the two things that has remained with me for until now. And so when I got diagnosed as PCOS, I actually looked it up as in what it is and all that. And it did say there was not a lot of information, but it did say that it is somehow related to diabetes. So you might have to take care of what you eat. And I know that it's either take care of how much you eat or the rate of how how you eat it. Like, whole grains and stuff might be absorbed slightly slower than like pure sugar. But I did not suspect that the grains are actually just as bad. It's just, slowly bad. And so, well, the GP made the right diagnosis, but just didn't give me the right medication. So after 3 months, he found that there's no change in the blood work. And he sent me off to an endocrinologist who said, yeah, it was the right diagnosis, but I'll put you on metformin instead. And I have always been overweight since puberty. So I was like, okay, whatever you say, you're the specialist, right? And I did ask him whether do I have to be, is it like a blood pressure medication where you have to take it for life? He did not say like exactly, yeah, you have to take it for life, but he didn't give me a right, like he didn't give me a clear answer either. So I was like, okay, seems like I have to take it for life. And I actually did look up the Australian Medicine Handbook, which is available where I work, and I have one copy myself. And it says it's an off-label use for PCOS, and not much information on the mechanism of action, which I would like to know. But they use it in diabetes to sensitize the cells to the sugar, like to make it take in more. Well, that was the only thing I could find. And the good thing with him putting me on metformin is that I just suddenly lost all that 15 kilos of weight. So when I was diagnosed, I was around 75 to 78 kilograms. And despite I know that I have to do exercise and all that, and I was swimming 3 times a week. I go to the aquatic center 3 times a week. And then because of the nature of my job, I don't get to sit down a lot. Like I'm probably have to stand or move around about like 12, 13 hours straight. So, but even that, and I control what I eat. Usually I would buy there's a type of rice in Australia that's supposed to be low glycemic index. The it's called a Dunagara clever rice or something.
Oh, well,
Um,
it must be good for you. It's called clever
yeah.
rice. It must be good.
So I did that, and I always portion like 1/3 meat, 1/3 vegetable, and then 1/3 or slightly less of carbs because I was unconsciously controlling the carbs, but I was just trying to get a more, whole grain version than the refined version. And that seems to work fine because every time I go to the doctor's to get a new prescription, we run a blood work and my liver enzymes and everything's are fine. And then I was taking metformin for the last 12, 13 years. And I'm not sure what I was doing, but one day I was like, fast forward to now, one day I was on YouTube and I came across Gary Taub's lecture. And what caught my attention was there was a lady who actually introduced him in the video for the lecture. And she said because of him, they went low carb with her husband, severely diabetic, was putting insulin shots and stuff. And after they went low carb, he completely went off his medication and insulin. And I was like, wow, They never teach that in school. Like, they always tell you that diabetes is a progressive condition. If you take care, you might live another 5 years or more. But if not, you might shorten your life. But there's no way to halt the progression. So I listened to what he said, and I was like, oh, well, it makes sense physiologically because I still remember some of the physiology I studied in school. And then after that, I came across Robert Lustig and his book Metabolical. And there is a section in his book that teaches you how to kind of make sense of your own blood tests and stuff. Because I suspect the doctors don't really know how to read them because they just look at the range that comes with the test. And they would be saying, oh, yeah, everything's fine because nothing is bolded. And the problem with like when they do a complete blood work or something, there's always this category that's called the ESR. I think it's a erythrocyte sediment rate or something. And that's like an indication of inflammation. But all the doctors I've seen, when they saw that on my blood test, they will be saying, no, it's nothing to worry about. It's not specific anyway, even though it's kind of like slightly higher than normal.
So sorry, they said it's not specific.
It's not specific and it doesn't mean much. So don't
Okay,
worry about it.
I would have said to them, it's pretty specific. It's got a name. That sounds pretty
Yeah.
specific to me.
And I was like, I didn't know too much because I don't really understand. Like I was probably as bad as them. Like we weren't taught what that means. We know what it indicates, but then what it means in the overall picture of your own health. And metabolic health has not been really taught about in when I was doing pharmacy school. And I do remember there was a little slide in the lecture mentioning something about metabolic syndrome X. But at that time, nobody told us what metabolic syndrome X was. It was just left it there and nobody actually dig into it. So when I got to look into his book and I read the chapter where he teaches you how to make sense of your blood work, I was like very curious to know. So I went to my local GP here and said, I would like to have all these blood tests done on my liver enzymes, especially because from what he said, there were so many people with fatty liver disease that it's warrant to have a look at. And I did not expect her reaction. She almost shouted at me. Well, she actually shouted at me because I did another test before, but she thought that because I'm not diabetic, she refused to do my HbA1c, whereas the doctor where I used to live in another part of France thought that I was diabetic, so she always ordered that. And when I asked her to put the HbA1c on the form request, she was like looking at my fasting blood glucose, which was in the normal range. And she's like, you're in the normal range. I don't see the point in ordering this test for you. I was like, yeah, but they're in normal range because they had the time and my body has dumped a lot of insulin to get it down over that 12 hours of fasting. But that does not mean that I don't have a problem because I've been diagnosed with the PCOS. And she's like, I don't think it's warranted. And she was almost shouting. And I was like, yeah, but my condition is not that. And she said, I think you're very disagreeable to question me.
Wow. So just to clarify, at this stage, you're in France.
Yes,
and you're still taking the metformin.
yes.
Okay,
And
and
she wanted me
you were being
to stop.
disagreeable because you wanted some blood
Yes.
tests.
And she wanted me to just stop my metformin just based on one fasting glucose reading alone. And I just didn't understand that because she wasn't really old. She's probably really fresh out of medical school, but she didn't have any understanding of the insulin resistance problem. And she was shouting at me, and then she even said things like, people think they can go on the internet to look for things, but, you know, and think that they know everything. But the problem is, you can't, like, when I was a pharmacist, I have customers who comes in and who was very in charge of their condition, and they went and taught themselves a lot, like reading research papers, looking to books, and because they want to know more. And they like they know more than I do because they live with the condition, and they actually read it up in depth of their own condition. So I just didn't think that because people would go and look on internet, they couldn't judge if the information is right or credible in some way. So I was like, I almost said that, but I was like, you didn't have monopoly on knowledge, to be honest. But she was so upset that I asked for those blood tests and I was trying to describe my condition that she kind of flew off the handle and I had to calm her down. And but in the end, I said, like, you don't understand. This is a big diagnosis when I had that done. And my life had to change in big time. And I would just like to know. I want to see what's the problem. And eventually she calmed down and she ordered the test. And I found my liver enzymes were like off the limit. Well, it's not that big, but it was like, I think the usual maybe around 20 is the upper limit. I got like 38, 40. And still, when we went back to see her, well, I find that very alarming. But when we went back to see her, she said, it's not that bad yet. We'll do something when it's worse. It's not that bad yet. We'll do something when it's about 60 or something, double. She said was when we'll do something if it's double or triple that upper limit. And I was like, really? And she offered to, she gave me another sort of test prescription to go have an ultrasound to confirm that it is fat and it wasn't by the medication because I was taking a contraceptive pill as well then. So we did that and it's confirmed that it was mainly liver fat that was causing the problem. And she even offered me to like come back next time and I will read your blood test for you. Like, really? You don't even know what it means. And you tell me that, we wait till it gets worse before we do anything. So I didn't wait for her and I did went into YouTube to find out what's the treatment for or what can I do when I have a fatty liver. And I started digging and I found Dr. Jason Fung, who has a whole series, like full series of lectures on obesity. And I I watch all that and I starting to understand how the insulin fits into all the fat creation, I would say. And because he gave such a solid foundation of knowledge, I could start to see what I can do. And the first thing I did was to cut the carbs again. And before that, I was following that advice of one toast a day with some jam for many, many years. And but I think the last year I was also having that one toast in the morning with a bit of jam. And but I find that I have a lot of hypoglycemic episodes by like say I have my breakfast at 7:30. By 10 o'clock I was shaking and perspiring and the ravenous feeling. So what I did to get rid of that feeling was to have some tea with a squirt of agave syrup because you know when you get hypo, have some jelly beans or sugar or something. It's what we always tell our customers. And then agave syrup was supposed to be low GI and all that, and and that was probably what mainly did it, I think, because it was over a few months. And when I discovered that I have fatty liver, I thought like no more carbs and sugar. And I thought I didn't have any confirmation of what to do then, but during the COVID period, I consciously chose not to eat carbs and eat more meat. And most people say that they gain weight during the confinement in the house, but like my husband and I, we lost like at least 3 kilos doing nothing, sitting around in the house. So that got me like I took a note of that. So when I had that diagnosis of fatty liver, I was like, right, we have to. I'm cutting all the carbs, and but I didn't really do it like cold turkey. I did like what Professor Bart Hay said, do it gradually. But I didn't know about him then. But I was thinking I would just gradually leave this one out, substitute things, and that I think over it was kind of like dirty keto for the first 2 months, I would say. And then towards Christmas, like about this period, I got more serious and I cut more carbs and no more bread, no more eating bread for breakfast, nothing. And the surprising thing was the day I changed the bread eating for breakfast into having an hard-boiled egg for breakfast, the hypoglycemic episodes immediately stopped, just like that. Like I was
That's
actually worried
awesome.
that I was actually worried that I might have it, but on that morning when I stopped and I just had a hard-boiled egg, I have no hypoglycemic episodes,
That's
just like that.
fantastic. And just to clarify, at this stage, you haven't found any carnivore content online. It's just
No,
like you're focused on cutting the carbs to help
yeah,
you with a fatty liver.
yeah, and I probably added more fiber because when I was reading Dr. Lustig's book, it says fiber helps to, you know, improve the microbiome and also avoid some of the absorption. But then I've also found then because I've came across Dr. Jason Fung and he was advocating for fasting, and I did. I think about this time last year, I did another blood test. My liver enzyme readings were slightly better, but still not out of the woods. So when then I considered doing fasting to really force the body to use up the fat. But I just wasn't sure because I don't want to be in hunger. And it was quite, I didn't think I would be able to do it because, this ravenous feeling is just not pleasant. But one day, because I didn't plan ahead, I didn't do a hard-boiled egg the night before, and we were going to go out to do some shopping. Um, I thought I'd just pop two or three walnut and be done with. And to my surprise, even that little bit of food, I didn't have any hypoglycemic problems right after. So that convinced me that I could do some intermittent fasting. And I didn't really do like crazy 24-hour right away. So I did like a 14-hour, because that was just like having breakfast 3 hours later. And then after I could do the 14-hour, I move on to the 16, and then I do the 18. And then one day I thought, well, I've done it for a month and I could probably go on to a 23 and a half to see if I could do it. And I made sure that I was always occupied because I went out and walk around the city for a few hours on an empty stomach. And to my surprise, it was like, yeah, it was doable. And I even bought the Keto Mojo, you know, the keto and glucometer, and to see if I'm getting more fat adapted. And and one day when I was doing something, painting, occupying myself, and at about 2 o'clock, I thought I'm not really hungry. That's kind of strange. And that's when I measured my ketones again to see, and it was like over 1 point something. And I was like, oh, cool. I'm getting to that fat adapted state. And since then it has been this. And throughout from I think around October through to about the year after, which was this year, May, when we went to Australia, I lost nearly 8 kilos by just doing some intermittent fasting and then cutting the carbs. And in the meantime, I came across Dr. Canberry on the on YouTube, and he was advocating for the carnivore diet. And I was like, oh, cool. I, now I have the license to eat meat and a lot of meat. So I kind of like switched to, instead of replacing vegetables for the carbs that I cut out, I kind of went on to more using meat with fatty cuts of meat, and then reducing the amount of vegetables. So I am thinking maybe now I'm about 80% meat and then 20% vegetables, and with just a little bit of carb if I want to. So, but I wasn't sure like if it's a good thing to do because a lot of people say that even my mom heard from her friends like if you eat a lot of meat, your blood is going to turn acidic and all that. And then because I came across like there are some bad information on the internet, like I think he was pretty much bashed by Nick Norwitz. His name is Lane Norton, I think.
Yeah, Lane.
And I came across some of his videos, and he was always saying that he's PhD. And at first, I wasn't really looking very closely, and so I gave it a go and I listened to what he has to say. But then, when he was describing, when you are off carbs for a long time, the body doesn't have to do a lot of, they don't have to make a lot of insulin reserve because you don't use it all that much. So I know that from one of the, I think, was it Dr. Ben Bigman or Dr. Jason Fung said that if you're off carbs for a long time, then there's not big reserve of insulin made there to just to chuck it when sugar comes. So what if you're going to do a glucose stress test, you are most definitely going to fail because there's not that much insulin to chuck at it. So consequently, your glucose is going to go way up and you are going to fail that. And the way I understood it is a transient glucose intolerance because you have no insulin to deal with right away until the body produces more. And what he was saying was he was calling it insulin resistance. And then someone commented on his video about that being inaccurate or something, and I saw the name Professor Bart K in the comments, so I went and looked him up, and then he was so when I found him, he was looking for he was talking a lot about what evolutionary biology. Like he was putting into context that if evolutionary we didn't have the mechanism to deal with all these things, we would have been dead long time ago. So for me, if you're saying if you eat a bit more meat than usual, and what is usual, that's the other question, that your blood is going to turn acidic. And I was like, oh, we'll be dead by then, like long time ago. So I think when you do the evolutionary biology thing, it kind of puts things in perspective that the body is kind of evolutionary apt or refined to do things. Except for when we do sugar, it just couldn't handle it. Obviously, it hasn't evolved to be able to handle that. But anything else that is within its limit of within its evolutionary limits, I think is fine. And what other thing that convinced me was when I was doing all the fasting and experimenting, I measured my blood sugar and ketones quite often, especially during like when my 23-hour fasting day. I would measure it, and because I was just curious to see what happens. And and from I think Dr. Jason Fong, he actually presented a chart or a graph saying if you if you are fat adapted, when your blood sugar is lower than the hypo level, you will be fine because the body will actually tap into the fat stores, and the ketones will actually take the role of the glucose. And I was like, oh, okay, is that really true? And during my 23-hour fasting days, and even some of like my regular fasting, 18-hour fasting days, I checked, and it is true that even when my blood glucose dipped below the hypoglycemic range, I feel completely fine. I wasn't going into a coma or anything. And also, when I was watching, one of the things that Dr. Lustig said was that, the blood tests that you got the range, they are calculated as a mean or an average. So if the average of the whole population shifted up, then it all shifted up. But that is by no means to say that it is what is optimum for the body. Because when he was in medical school, the liver enzyme range was actually lower than what we have now. But because everybody's kind of fatty liver-ish, that the average actually shifted up, and we
That's
call it
right.
normal.
Yeah. When the entire population is sick, the average is normal, but normal doesn't necessarily mean healthy, right?
Yeah, and the thing is, the doctors probably didn't know about that. And because if you're going to read by just looking at the range and call it normal or not normal, then there is really no, there's really no thought process into that. And so, and then since I started more meat based, I have not experienced or animal based or carnivore. Uh, I have not experienced any hypoglycemic episodes at all.
That
Yeah.
brings me to like, what's the status with your metformin, PCOS, and fatty
Uh,
liver?
that okay. The thing is, when I got a handle of how to manipulate the way my body uses energy, I kind of gained the confidence of I probably don't need the metformin. And I also learned from Dr. K, Professor K, that how the metformin works is through the AMP kinase pathway. That sort of, in the end effect is to force the cell to take up more glucose or sugar. So I was like, oh, that can be good. So I started cutting down my metformin because I take 1,000 milligrams a day. And then I started to only take once a day, so 500 milligrams once a day for about like a month. And I thought I don't feel any different. I didn't feel unusual or uncomfortable. So after that, I cut it down to whenever I have a bit of carbs, I take a tablet. And then the rest of the time, I don't take any tablets. And up to by the time we got back from Australia in July, I just stop it completely because I don't feel any worse. And when I check my blood glucose after I eat, it's within the fasting range most of the time, unless there's a bit of carbs mixed in. And I thought, yeah, that would be fine. And the confirmation that I was doing right thing was in July, I stopped taking the contraceptive to see if the period will be regular. Because before that, I was on contraceptive too for about 10 years. And when you're on contraceptive, I think what they were telling us was you will have period, but you don't ovulate because of the way the pill is set up. You will always have a period a month, but that doesn't mean that your body is doing it itself. It's just the medication that's doing it. So I stopped it, and then within a month, I got my period, and then this has been maybe about 5 months, and it has been like regular to the day. That's never happened to me before since I had period as a girl. I was
That's
like,
awesome.
okay,
And that's, you said that's regular to the day.
yeah, it's I worked it out to be 30 days, 30 days cycle. And because of the month, there's 30 days in and 31 days in different months. That might jump a day or two, but the duration is exactly 30 days.
I mean, I'm saying congratulations. I don't know, like most people, I think, are probably like, "Oh, I don't really like getting it," but when it's
Oh
been
yeah, that
missing
was
for
what I
so
said
long,
to
it's
my
good to get it back.
endocrinologist at first, but that was what I said to my Australian endocrinologist. I was like, "Oh my God, I don't want this thing," and um, I don't mind if it's not there. And he said something like, "You would want it to be there because you want the cycle to help shedding the endometrium, because if not, if there is a lot of abnormalities in shedding it or not being shed, then you are prone to having like endometrial cancer or something like that in the future. So I was like, okay. But I think the confirmation that I did the right thing was that now it's been regular for the last 5 months. So I think I have practically kind of, if not putting it in remission, cured something that no doctors ever thought of doing for the last 10, 20, 12 years. And I'm still under the observation of an endocrinologist. But when I saw her beginning of this year, she told me that there's nothing we can do for your fatty liver. All you can do is exercise and eat well. And that was all she said. She understand the concept of insulin resistance and all that, but she just said nothing we can do. But I mean, I kind of had a sort of medical background, so I thought maybe, and at that time I was already having keto meals and eating keto, so I wasn't really panicking. But imagine if someone who doesn't know all that and suddenly got told that and there's nothing we can do for you, then I would be in quite a panicky situation. Like, I would say they should really be careful of how they frame or word certain things.
Right. It's terrible when you're told by a doctor, "There's nothing we can do." It's a
And she's the
horrible feeling.
specialist. Like, I don't have to argue with her about insulin resistance and all that, but then she has no solution either. And but then at that time I was already keto, and I've already seen how the body works and how it deals with the energy because I was already fat adapted. And I thought, well, I really don't need you. And I was glad that she said don't need to go back to the GP for this condition, and we will just check in once a year to do some blood tests and make sure everything is still going. So I really don't have to argue with the GP again, and I'm actually quite okay if you don't know everything, because nobody does. But then to don't know much and then to be yelling and to say it's not good to question you simply because you went through 5 years of medical school, then I would consider her fired.
Yeah,
But the
it
problem,
seems pretty unreasonable to be saying, "Don't question me. This degree cost me so much money. I get to tell you what to do."
yeah, I think so. And there's a lot of doctors who would say that. But that was my first experience of a doctor who is, not old or anything or been in the business for a long time, but just fresh, almost like you could say fresh out of medical school, and had this sort of high and mighty, I own the knowledge sort of attitude. It's pretty scary. But
So,
yeah, I think it is.
at
Yeah, go ahead.
sorry, at this stage, like, the fatty liver is the numbers are under control, but you just have to wait for another test in a year's
Yeah, I just
time.
have to wait for other tests, maybe around next week-ish to double check. But given that I have been, because I started doing fasting, actually not really fasting. I just stopped having breakfast until lunch, just to, because from what I learned from Dr. Jason Fung is if you want the insulin to come down, then the fasting has to be sufficiently long to allow the chance for it to come down. And once it's down, then the body can access the fat storage. And I no longer test my blood glucose all that often because at one stage I want to see how it works and I don't want to get a CGM. So I was poking my fingers like all over the place. I ran out of fingers. and and I would know that what kind of roughly would affect me, and the scariest thing that I experienced was having, those little cakes they call financier in Japan, but it's called madeleine here. I had, I think, maybe one, and my blood glucose went through the roof. And I even had it with an egg to kind of like stem the absorption, but it didn't work. And one time I had some phyllo pastry, so I wrapped two thin ones with some beef. It didn't go through the roof, but one of that actually puts me slightly over the fasting limit after food. So seems like I can't really have all that much.
So, have you considered like getting rid of the carbohydrates, like the veggies and
I
everything
tried
entirely?
I tried I wanted to try carnivore like 100% or at least 95%. I think in I think around October-ish. But then I ran into a bit of a bad constipation. And I know that people say it's because you're not taking enough fat, which I found that is untrue because I was practically chucking fat into my mouth. I bought like things like sour cream that is in like 40% fat, and I make sure I have one or two spoonful with meals, or put some cream in my coffee, but that didn't really work. And and I was like, but it's kind of weird if I add a bit of vegetable in, and it was still not doing anything. I still have very bad constipation, and the fat didn't work. And I discovered what it was, that sort of like a bit of a voodoo science. Is I remember I have a friend who couldn't eat any chocolate because she will get constipation. And then my mom is very into, Chinese traditional medicine kind of thing. And to her, because back then when we were kids, we were living in a rural village where there would be no doctors. And when I was about 7 or 8, maybe there was one doctor who come once a week. So my mom had to really, rely on this sort of thing to give us relief when we're sick. And from young, she will be nagging like, "Oh, don't eat too much of this stuff or that stuff," or things like that. And it turns out it was the lamb that my body couldn't handle a lot of, because it's sort of like what the Chinese medicine will say, a bit of a heaty food to the body, like too much of a heat or warmth. And then one day I thought of that, and I thought maybe I would just have some green tea to bring down the temperature, and it worked. And because of my mom's nagging, I kind of know what to have, like the green tea or some daikon could work. So I might give it a try again, like completely 100% carnivore, as in what I eat, maybe in January. But where I run into like maybe constipation, I might just have to have some green tea or something. So it won't be like completely 100%. There will be like maybe 90, 95. But I'm actually curious to see if there are other stuff that I am not aware of could be healed by more, pure carnivore eating. But I've gotten a lot of benefits out of it, aside from I kind of cured my PCOS. Um, and my eczema actually got really a lot better. Like I used to have, when it flares up, I could have a big patch where it was itchy and raw and it could bleed, and then attach to like the t-shirt I'm wearing, that sort of thing. But lately I haven't got any big ones, just little tiny specks here and there, and very manageable. And I had this thing called I think in Australia they would call it the chilblain, a sort of a skin condition or something that happens to like extremities, your fingers, your toes, when it's humid and cold where you live in the winter. And there was 1 or 2 years that it was very, very severe, almost comes on every day, very itchy, and the toes are swollen, and it won't go away until winter is off. And I will be left with discoloration because once your skin has inflammation for a period of time, when it is healed, it tends to become darker in color and takes like 6 months to a year to fade away. So my toes were a bit purplish by this because of that inflammation, and it hasn't been severe last winter nor this winter. And I find that I could tolerate cold a lot more despite losing the weight, because this summer I well, we can always swim here with the pool of the landlord, but it's not really a heated pool. When the sun is hot and it heats it up, then it's fine. But as the summer goes into autumn, the pool starts to be very cold. And I remember last year I wasn't doing keto that time in summer last year. I could tolerate to about 23 degrees in the pool. But then this year I could actually still swim in a pool of like 18 degrees of about for 15 minutes, and I didn't get any problems. And yeah, I think, and there's all sorts of little things that kind of got better. But the big thing was the PCOS. It seems have just kind of like went into remission for the last 5 months.
That's awesome. Um, so how is your husband with this? Is he kind of following the same eating patterns as you?
He still have his breakfast in his bread and things. But because I'm the one doing the cooking, he has no choice but to eat more low carb. And even him, when I started doing keto last year, he actually might have dropped like another 3, 4 kilos just by eating lunch and dinner the way I do, and still having his you know Nutella bread spread and toast every day. But we did discover that even if you do some, well, it doesn't have to be real keto or carnivore, but just do it a bit dirty, you will still lose weight. Because when he was working in Paris, they have a the sort of a staff canteen. That's what you call it. And he was supposedly eating very well, you know, cooked food, not instant or ultra processed. But even that, he was like gaining weight without knowing, with all the walking he's done for days. And then when we had to be confined at home because of the whole pandemic, he actually lost like nearly 8 kilos for just not eating those food. And we were really surprised. And I thought, oh my God, what were we eating before? And I've always cooked, and But still, if you're going to not make your own meals, there is not a lot of things you would know what they chuck in it, and what they put in that you you gain weight with. And by just stopping, like that was even like cooked food, and supposedly healthy, but it's just not that healthy. And we didn't really eat a lot of poison that, some people go eating that way. Like not a lot of ultra processed food, but we still have like, pasta, rice, potatoes. They all have you thinking that those things are infinitely better than, uh, ultra processed food in a bag, but they are just as bad. And I had a realization that, even if you are eating whole grain, you just delay the process of it being turned into sugar, but the total amount of sugar remains the same at the end of the day. So there is no point in saying why one is better than the other. Sure, it induces less insulin spike, but at the end of the day, it's still the same amount of sugar that will end up in your body. So, so I thought, oh well, those are all total nonsense. Then what I was told back in school, and whatever we continued to tell diabetes patient, and that the fact that it's no longer the fact that it is prolonged and chronic disease, I think is quite untrue. If I could sort of reverse my PCOS, and I've proved it to myself with my own body, that I don't think that the diabetes is actually a chronic thing. And I'm actually glad, like people like you, Dr. Canberry, Dr. Jason Fong. I think I was even listening to Dr. Eric Westman and then Steve Fenney. Um, and I think because they were in the sports science and a lot of how the body actually handles the energy, I think it gives a different perspective, and you start thinking maybe it's not really that chronic after all if the athletes could change it. And also, it's sort of like what I learned, sort of like confirm what one of the lecturer for nutrition had said, best not to eat than eat and go exercise later, because of all the athletes who were, popping all the sugar gels and things, and they think that they could exercise themselves out of it. But if you're doing 5 to 7 hours of exercise every day and still becoming diabetic, then there is something wrong with that logic.
Definitely.
So, but because we never have this sort of wide before YouTube, we didn't have all these sort of wide opinions that we sort of don't know. And back when we were in school, things are probably taught in sections, and I find it hard to see the general picture. Usually, I have to go dig it out myself, but most of our lecturers are specialized in something, and they only teach what they specialize in, but nobody has actually wanted to connect the dots, as in, so what does that mean in the overall health of the overall body? And nobody actually asked that question.
And that's the biggest issue, right? Because nothing exists in a vacuum, right? It's all about the
Yeah.
context of how everything's operating, right?
Yeah, and when I was in my fourth year, we were invited, if you got a certain GPA, to do an honors thesis. And then that was, I actually wanted to do a PhD at that time. Like I was aiming for it. Um, but then I saw one of the projects that my classmate was doing. It was to find out if snake venom can produce wine. And I thought that was some cockamamie. Why would you why would you spend the time doing that crap? And then and it ended up like she got a first class honors or something because, the paper was well written. But then I found myself asking, so what's the application for humankind? What have you achieved? And it was when I thought that it seems like you just do a thesis for the sake of doing some thesis to get some degree, and you have no nothing to you don't have a wish to know what that works for the humankind or
Right,
how to
it's
better the
just a
human
piece of
race.
paper. It's
Yeah.
just a piece of paper, and yeah, I've sat through one of those ceremonies, and the amount of times I was shaking my head as they were reading out, the
Oh,
PhD, this person gets one for, putting yogurt on these parts of the human body and all this and it's like, they studied that? Really?
but one of the things we did in school was there's a subject called epidemiology, but it's not how you do epidemiology study, which is completely unreliable, but it was how to catch them in their line, um, that they taught us, which was useful. And I did my honors thesis with a supervisor who is interested in finding out all the, how they adjust the statistics to lie and things. And my honors thesis was actually trying to see if there is a correlation, at least between the advertisements that the doctor sees in their medical journals and the prescribing habits. And from that thesis, from that project, it's sort of like I know that there is, because I could see the data and we plotted all the graphs and things, to know that specifically at the time, because I went to count all the, I went and count and write down what sort of advertisements for which antihypertensives at what time, and my supervisor had the prescribing data for that, so we match it to all the timeline, and we could actually see the huge correlation for when, if the drug company is pushing that particular antihypertensives, you actually see a rise in the prescribing practice of that antihypertensive, and we were like, wow.
Interesting. That's,
So
pretty damning.
yeah, so it was like, what else do they do that? But whatever they do, I'm not surprised because of what I've done with that thesis and that course we had to take, with the epidemiology telling you how they actually manipulate and the conflict of interest. So since we had that course in school, whenever I look at a paper, the first thing I do is to flip to the back and see who are the sponsors. If they are sponsored by drug companies, then it's really no point in reading that.
Yeah, it's not worth the paper it's written on then, right?
Yeah, yeah. And it's surprising how many times I managed to find that they're sponsored by drug companies, and that I don't think is worth reading, even when I found the paper with a very convincing title. And yeah, like there was a doctor called David Diamond, I think. He was diagnosed with familial hy-
Oh,
hypercholesterolemia. Yes, and he it took him the diagnosis to when digging, and all the stuff that we were learned and taught in school. What he said was right, like relative risk versus absolute risk, and then final mortality to like just surrogate marker, which is like the LDL and stuff like that. And he said that because he went and dig around and all that are true of how they kind of present the data, and we know that the data can be manipulated in gazillion ways. Like, and you wouldn't even know the wiser for whatever all the things that they've done, and let alone with things that they don't publish or publish and ended the studies earlier in favor before all the bad things comes out, and the study's never long enough. And we also talk to look into the group where, if you have 5 people, you can't really say much for the whole population, and that's no statistical strength for that. And even if there
Right.
is a good statistical significance, is that really clinical significant, or vice versa? If clinically significant but not statistically significant, is that going to mean something? So I think I was glad that we had that.
Yeah, it's very, very interesting. Um,
Yeah.
so is there a way that people can reach out to you? Do you have any social media or any way of getting in contact?
I have social media, but it's not with the Carnivore thing. But maybe you can pass my email address. I was thinking of doing a channel on, like, keto carnivore, because, like you said, when you found something good, you want to tell everybody. But I wasn't sure, like, how much content I would have to deal with, because you guys all have done so much already. So not too sure, but I might still do in the because I like cooking, and most of the keto, or if you want to just do keto or just more keto war days, they are mainly in, like, more Western kind of taste or palate. So I like them. I like both. So I might want to do a channel based more on, like, more Oriental and Western kind of thing to cater to everybody. That is kind of fun. Like, I enjoy finding what's the substitute that will make it keto or ketovore.
Yeah, no worries. So I'll put your email in the show notes. Yeah, thank you so much for coming on and sharing your story. I really appreciate your time.
Thanks for having me, for letting me tell my story.